Hi, I'm Jennifer Potter, Executive Director of Be Well Texas. Too many people are struggling alone these days, and alcohol and drug deaths are increasing. We started Be Well Texas to offer high-quality, science-based addiction treatment and recovery services anywhere, even at home. We provide compassionate, caring support virtually or in person. In many cases, there is no cost for treatment if you don't have insurance. Really. Welcome to Be Well Texas. We're glad you're here.
Hello and welcome to the Republic of Football podcast. I'm your host, Carter Yates, and joining me is Dave Campbell's senior college writer, Mike Craven. And Craven, we actually just saw each other in person. We're both in the office right now, and then we went to our separate podcasting area rooms. We said, hey, it's good catching up, but we got to go podcast, lay down some tracks.
Takes too hot to put us in the same room, so we're separated by some walls and keep us contained here on the April 1st edition of Republic of Football.
Yes, exactly. It had very much the energy of, when I used to be growing up in high school and me and my friends would be hanging out together and say, you know what, let's all just go home and play Fortnite. Go in the separate rooms is kind of what it felt like just now. But Craven is – yes, sir. Craven is in the DFW doing his magazine tour. He hit Baylor yesterday and North Texas today. What's on the rest of the week docket, Craven? I know you're doing 5 cities in 5 days.
Yeah, so it's Baylor in North Texas. Then we're SMU on Wednesday, TCU on Thursday, drive to Lubbock and do Tech on Friday, and then head home for the weekend. The South and East, because I'm Austin located, so I'm kind of central. And then the next week I'll do Texas State, UTSA, Houston, Rice, and Texas A&M, and knock out that side of the map as well. And then do Texas the following week, and that will wrap up the magazine tour for 2025.
And a lot of people would say that sounds exhausting, like a lot of hard work. And yes, it is a lot of hard work, but it's almost like a mini vacation for you because you got 10 hours of sleep last night for the first time in 6 weeks probably.
Yeah, my wife doesn't listen to this podcast, and so I can admit this. I said I was working last night until about 1 a.m. Really, I went to sleep at 9 p.m. and woke up this morning at 7 a.m. for 10 hours of blissful, almost biblical type sleep. One of the best nights of my life. Having a baby is great. I recommend it. It's tremendous, but you're just tired. Like that's just like what it is. You're just signing up to be to get 10 hours of sleep was tremendous. I just can't brag about it to anybody at my house, or I'd get a shoe thrown at me.
But you can brag about it on here for sure. And so we're going to talk about your first 2 magazine visits, Baylor yesterday, North Texas today. And then we're going to wrap up the show discussing the program rankings through half a decade. You came out with that story last week. It had some really interesting takeaways about how the state of Texas has fared from 2020 to 2024. But let's start with the Baylor Bears. And I know, Craven, on your magazine tours, and I've fallen into this habit too, is we start drinking the Kool-Aid after visiting them and saying, I can see this team getting to 10 wins, no matter what team it is, because, spring ball is when the optimism is at an all-time high. But you were already the conductor on the Baylor's winning the Big 12 train. So are you more or less confident in Baylor after your magazine visit?
I'm as confident.
I get more confident.
Right. I think the Big 12 is kind of a jumbled mess, and to pretend as if we know what's going to happen or who's going to win the conference, is fool's gold. And I completely understand that. I think there's a handful, maybe even more teams, maybe 7 or 8 teams with a realistic shot to win the Big 12. I think Baylor is one of those. And I feel as strongly about that leaving the visit in Waco as I did going into it. 9 starters returning on offense. And one of those they're replacing is a wide receiver. The other is a right tackle. And the guy who played 3 or 4 games at starter at right tackle is back, right? So, almost 10 full starters back. Replacing wide receivers is probably the easiest place to go find help in the transfer portal. They signed 2 guys there that can help in the slot. So I think offensively, Baylor's loaded. Same offensive coordinator, same quarterback. They're going to score a lot of points. Defensively, they needed to get better in the secondary. But after spending the day there and talking to them about the transfer portal and who they brought in, I think they feel early on, a week into spring, that they hit on corner, that they hit on a couple safeties, that they feel pretty good about nose tackle, spots that they up. And so you're right. One of the things I've changed about my process doing the magazine is I do a records prediction for each team before I go, and then I do one after I go, and then kind of see how they compare. Because if you wait until to build your idea until after you're there, you're going to walk out thinking everybody's going to win 10 games. So starting with Baylor was a tough one to test that against, because I do think Baylor is capable of winning 10 games if everything lines up right and they stay healthy in all those qualifiers.
I know you're a big fan of Dave Aranda personally. I'm also a huge fan of Dave Aranda. I love to just listen to him talk about life. Did he drop any bars for you on the magazine stop? I mean, what was he like catching up with him?
Yeah, it was fun to catch up with him. And one of the things I wanted to talk to Aranda about was like his transformation as a head coach and how that came about. Just kind of like, I'd imagine all of these guys who are assistant coaches think about what being a head coach would be or how they would do it differently than the ones that they've had, and et cetera. And so, he's transformed a lot as a head coach. He didn't go for it on 4th down at all. And then all of a sudden he went for it all the time. He didn't like the transfer portal, and now they use it. He was hesitant to get into NIL, and now, they wear shirts that say we pay players, during practices, right? What has that transformation process been like? And I think one of the more interesting things he talked about yesterday when I was with him was he never wanted to be a head coach. It wasn't something he sat around and thought about because he didn't want to be that. I think all of the things that it comes with, all the non-football stuff that happens with it, I think are the things that make him, uncomfortable is probably a strong word, but scare him a little is what he said. It kind of put him outside of his comfort zone. And I think he's growing into it, maybe in a way we usually don't give coaches the grace and the patience to grow into it. But Baylor was patient with him and maybe a year and a half longer than a lot of people thought that he would. And it feels like if 2025 hits, that was a smart bet by Rhodes and them. So it was a fun visit. You talk more about philosophy and like life stuff than you do like X's and O's, I think, with Aranda, but it was a good visit for sure.
So they're in a position to win the Big 12, and that's a credit to, the patience that Baylor has had with Dave Aranda. If they win the Big 12, why did they do it? Like, what is their biggest strength on this team coming out of your magazine visit?
Yeah, I think it's continuity. In an age where there's so much turnover everywhere, it's just inherently in the business, on the coaching staff and on the roster, Baylor doesn't have that. And they left last year with a ton of momentum. They have 9 starters back on offense, 7 starters back on defense, both coordinators. Aranda's going to be calling plays for the second year as a defensive guy. And I'd imagine that they've figured out that balance even more now. Last spring, Aranda said he couldn't even get a sentence out before he had to back up and explain what he meant in that sentence. Like, it was just a constant. Everybody was new. They're teaching everybody, including the offensive staff, and figuring out what that was going to look like. There are new pieces that are going to have to play important roles, but by and large, this is a group that Aranda knows, and I think that's allowed them to jumpstart the preparation into 2025.
So I was reading your insider notes up on TexasFootball.com right now, and guys, these are going to be rolling out all spring as Craven goes to magazine visits. I'll have some out on Sam Houston and UTEP when I visit them. And just basically notebook dumping from what we heard in the magazine stop. Won't exactly, some of that information will make it in the magazine. Some of it won't. It'll just be on the site. So I was reading that, and I had a couple questions for you, Craven, off that insider notes. What is the biggest roster question mark right now? And I get the sense it's either edge rushers or cornerbacks based on your insider notes. So what would you pick out of those two? We'll talk about both, but what's the biggest question mark right now?
I think it's edge. And the reason I think it's edge is because at least some of the guys at cornerback are known commodities for Baylor. And Tevin Williams has played. Caden Jenkins has played. And so while they want more from those guys at cornerback, the staff has coached them. They've been coached by the staff. They played in front of the fans. The edge guys that are going to play just haven't played a lot of football at Baylor. They're either transfer portal players or they're guys who have kind of waited their turn behind other players and now they're about to go. But Amarion Winston from Oregon, Matthew Fobbs-White from Tulane are probably the athletes that they brought in most talented or most athletic through the training. And they're just going to have to figure that out on the fly. Like I think that they think that there's potential there and they like what they're going to get. But it's not going to know anything until they line up against Auburn and see if they can get after the quarterback.
Now, I saw you said a name to know is Jackie Marshall, and he was the highest graded player on defense per PFF last year. He had the most quarterback hurries, but you said the staff said he could develop into an all-conference type player. Is he an edge rusher? Like, where is he going to play?
So, Baylor runs that odd man front. He's going to be kind of the 4-eye on the field side. He'll be more on the wide side of the field, which allow him to get after the passer a little bit more, kind of where Gabe, some of those players who have gotten higher sack numbers. So I think he's going to be lined up with like a tackle instead of just on a guard at the way that they play with their three defensive linemen. So they expect the production to be more. I think he's going to have more of a role, more responsibilities, and he could be a real breakout player. The issue for Baylor in terms of defense linemen, issue is probably the wrong word, but just the way that they run a system, it funnels so much to their linebackers and to their like edge player that like you don't put up enough stats to be like all conference. But he's going to be one of those players that like PFF grades really high and like coaching staffs talk about that maybe just don't show up on the stat sheet as much.
So I've seen that. I was going through the stats and I saw Baylor hasn't had someone get over 4.5 sacks since the 2021 Big 12 championship season. Is that also attributed to the scheme of Dave Aranda, or is that they just haven't had a war daddy pass rusher for 3-4 years?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, they want a guy who could get 8, 9, 10 sacks. You saw that at LSU when they've had that occasionally at Baylor. Like you mentioned early on in his tenure, they had that a little bit more. So they're not going to shy away from having, as you mentioned, like a war daddy type defensive end that's going to come and get a bunch of sacks. Also, that scheme spreads it around. And part of that scheme is mixing in blitzes and showing a blitz here and actually blitzing from there, the creepers that he's known for having on his defensive side of the ball with the blitzing packages that he does. And so I do think it's one of those defenses that lends itself to being more spread around and having more guys with multiple sacks rather than a couple guys with a bunch of them. But if they had a guy that could go get after the quarterback and really demand that kind of attention on the edge, they're not going to hold him back either.
Yeah. So edge is probably the biggest question mark. Secondary is probably the second biggest question mark. I want to talk about Caden Jenkins, the cornerback. He was a freshman, second-team All-American. Last year, admittedly had a sophomore slump. What do you think the staff's consensus and outlook for him is? Are they expecting a bounce back? Or is he really going to have to compete for this starting job? What's going on there?
Yeah, I do think that they're expecting a bounce back, but he's going to be competing for a starting job, just like all these guys. One of the things that Baylor was pretty adamant about on the defensive side of the ball is we haven't played good enough in the secondary for any of these guys to feel like they're starters. That goes for Bobby Devin, goes for the nickel, Carl Williams, like all those guys are competing for their jobs. And so they brought in some new faces at corner, some new faces at safety. And I think they're going to use the spring, summer, and early fall camp to just figure that stuff out. Maybe even the first couple of games in non-con to figure out who their best 5 are. I don't think any of those dudes have a for sure locked down starting spot because that's been the weak link of their defense. And they need to get better on the back end to improve over there. Because like we mentioned earlier, I think the offense is pretty known. Like I think Baylor's going to have one of the best offenses in the Big 12. It's going to come down to how good this defense is. And if this defense can be upper half of the league, they have a real shot to be in Arlington in the Big 12 championship.
Yeah, I promise, guys, we're going to start talking about the offense soon. But the defense is what intrigues me so much. One, because Dave Aranda is a defensive guy by trade. But two, that's kind of what held them back last year and could potentially hold them back again this year. Is there a transfer on the defensive edge side in the secondary that you could see having a Keaton Thomas like breakout year. Keaton Thomas is going to be their stud linebacker. He had over 100 tackles. Is there someone like that in the secondary? I'm thinking Devin Turner, Tyler Turner, one of the edge guys, like anyone they talked about really highly.
And Marion Winston is a player that I think is poised to be a big time guy. You know, Travion Barnes is a linebacker from FIU. He's not practicing right now. I do think he's going to start next to Keaton Thomas and replace Matt Jones. And you know, as I mentioned, this is a very linebacker friendly defense. Like, it funnels a lot to the second level and to those guys to get that type of production. So, you know, he could be 100+ tackle guy at the end of the year if he's back healthy. I think he could be a huge add there. You know, you mentioned the Turner guys, you know, no relation, but both Tyler Turner and Devin Turner both competing in safety. So I'll mention Calvin Simpson-Hunt, a cornerback who's going to come in and really boost that room, and I think compete with Tevin Williams and compete with Caden Jenkins for the other cornerback spot. He's somebody that was mentioned a few times by the defensive staff that I think has a different level of athlete, obviously, and you know, if he can reach that potential at Baylor, then, you know, all of a sudden, you know, in the Big Ten and the SEC, maybe he's, you know, competing for a job, whereas in the Big 12, he can be kind of an all-conference type talent.
Last year, Baylor's offense, I think, had the most rising stars, like biggest stock-up guys by the end of the year. And Sawyer Robertson, Bryson Washington. You could probably throw Josh Cameron in there too, even though I think we all knew he was like a good player before last season. Is there anyone on that offense right now that you could say, come season's end, they're a potential draft pick that we didn't think about at the beginning of the season, or they're an all-conference player that we didn't think about at the beginning of the season?
It's probably maybe some offensive linemen, you know, like Sidney Fugar when he was moved out to left tackle last year in the bye week, you know, before they went on that run against Texas Tech. Like, he's given a lot of credit for solidifying that offensive line and like restoring balance to the group up front and unlocking their potential. All of a sudden the run game got there, and then, you know, Sawyer Robinson, the passing game exploded as well. So, you know, maybe him, you know, their right guard they really like. I'm not going to butcher his last name. So like, I think a couple offensive linemen, you know, are probably, but you know, they don't get a ton of attention. Michael Trigg, maybe at tight end, you know, a transfer who was there last year who, you know, again, I think one of the keys to their 6-game winning streak at the end of the year was getting him more involved in the passing game. He's just a mismatch nightmare, you know, too big for defensive backs, too fast for linebackers, kind of that prototypical tight end. And in Spavital's offense, you know, he's going to get a lot of matchups. He's going to get a lot of one-on-ones with guys that he's faster than, because they spread the ball out so much and they run the football. Just he can become somebody that maybe is kind of an unsung hero of this team at the end of it, if we're just talking offense.
And then in terms of other guys who could be breakout stars, I'm thinking about like true freshmen right now. There's a lot of early enrollees there. Are there any people who you could see by season's end, like he's the biggest breakout true freshman guy?
That's a good one. They really like the quarterback from Coppell. He's somebody mentioned a few times. I guess I'll go Caden Knighton. The running back, you know, they have pretty good running backs, obviously. You know, Bryson Washington's really good, but like Dawson Pendergrass is also somebody who'd started a lot of Big 12 schools. But they're going to want to spread the ball around. They're going to want to kind of keep the wear and tear low, especially early in the year, because they're planning on playing 13, 14, 15 games if all goes right. They really like Caden Knighton so far. Cameron Morgan on the edge out of South Oak Cliff is probably a guy who, you know, we see in pass rushing situations. I'm not calling him Colin Simmons, but like that kind of role where, you know, you're not asked to do a ton, but it's like, if it's 3rd and 13, like go hunt the quarterback. So those two guys feel like, dude, maybe one of the wide receivers kind of pops up and is able to become the 4th or 5th wide receiver behind the returning guys and a couple of the transfers like Cole Wilson or Kobe Prentice. So, you know, it's only been 4 practices into spring ball, but it did feel like they really liked a lot of the young guys from the 2025 class that were already on campus.
Yeah, it feels like that 2025 class, they're banking on that, not necessarily being like a program culture changing class, but like a core class to Dave Aranda, like bridging the eras of pre-Dave Aranda NIL to like post-Dave Aranda, we pay players NIL type deals, because they're bringing guys in with high character that, you know, they're also getting some NIL money now. it's funny you mentioned, Edward Griffin, the Coppell quarterback. I was reading your insider notes, and they're talking about how they need to like throw him out of the facility because he's just trying to study so much. I mean, that tracks with what we had seen from Edward Griffin last year at Coppell. I remember I was out at 7-on-7, and I talked to Antonio Wiley, the Coppell head coach, and he was basically like, Edward Griffin was on a visit to Baylor Friday, came back to Saturday morning 7-on-7 for a tournament. The Coppell had already qualified for state, so the tournament was just practice tournament. And oh, by the way, all his wide receivers were missing, doing something else, so he was throwing to all backups. It was like that was the type of player he is. So that's really cool to see he's keeping that up at Baylor.
Yeah, I mean, he's legit in the race to be QB3. I mean, obviously they'd like to redshirt him, but when I asked if like Walker White, the transfer from Auburn, was QB2, they were like, no. Like there is a real competition behind Sawyer Robinson. White's probably got the room, but he's new, learning the offense, just like Griffin is. So it'll be interesting to see where he falls. I bet that he would redshirt. But he is a quarterback that they really like and feel lucky to have.
Anything else, like closing thoughts on Baylor? Like anything we didn't cover on offensive side? I know we kind of touched on the defense more, but like any other closing thoughts on them?
No, I mean, they think they got the best punter in the nation.
There we
Palmer
go.
Williams. They're really big on their punter. And then they're a spot that, I think they're going to have a new kicker, even though the returner is back. It sounds like Rhett Armstrong, that's another true. Actually, that's probably the true freshman who's going to have the biggest year.
Special teams, the most important phase of the game.
Yeah, their place kicker, Rhett Armstrong, they're high on. I think he might win the job over Isaiah Hawkins.
All right, there we go. That is Mike Craven's Baylor stop. You can read all his insider notes on TexasFootball.com. We're going to shift over to North Texas, which you just got back from. Craven, you've also been pretty high on North Texas. I think I saw on your stone cold predictions, I might butcher it. It was 10 wins for North Texas.
Oh, my prediction was just that they had the most wins of the G5 programs in Texas.
Okay. So that would put them around 8, 9, 10, maybe.
Yeah.
I like that prediction a lot. Do you feel just as confident in that after visiting today?
Yeah, I do. But a lot of that is like, I don't know if North Texas is better than UTSA or Texas State, who are the other two teams in there. If all three of them played the exact same schedule, I don't know. Maybe I'd have North Texas third there in those teams. But I do think that you look at the team and they just have the ability to make a run. Like if North Texas hits their ceiling this year, they can win 9 or 10 games with that schedule. Like it is, the non-con is nothing, right? I mean, I think Western Michigan, Washington State, they could possibly go 3-0 and be 3-0, 4-0 going into that Army game. I can't remember if that's the 4th or 5th game, but they don't play Tulane. They don't play Memphis. They get UTSA at home. Tulane's early in the year, Army's early in the year, breaking in a new quarterback. I'm always going to bet on Eric Morris's offense. And I don't think they have a starting quarterback right now. Reese Poffenbarger, the transfer from Miami, Drew Mestmaker, who had a big game in the bowl game. Like, I think those two are really in a battle. They're splitting snaps this spring, sharing snaps with the first team. So I do think they're still figuring out quarterback. I'm just always going to bet on the Eric Morris offense to score points. Maybe that's like blind faith, but I feel like he's earned that at this point. I mean, they're always like top 5 total offense, top 25 scoring offense. Like, I don't think it's going to be the offense that really holds them back. And I think my optimism for North Texas goes on what I think about Skylar Cassidy and his ability to coach defense. Like, we saw it at Sam Houston in year 1, how much better they got. They ended up winning 10 games. 5 or 6 of his starters are going to be Sam Houston players that he brought over. The defensive line looks a lot better. They're running a 4-man front for the most part. I think they like their defensive ends. If they can be big enough to stop the run, I think they have a chance to be a middle-of-the-pack defense in the AAC, and I think that's all they need to be, is just not awful.
Mm-hmm. After that bowl game against Texas State, when Drew Mestmaker started, Eric Morris was talking in the post-game press conference, and I know a lot of those press conferences can be coach speak, but he had said a quote about, like, I have coached Patrick Mahomes, Cam Ward, NFL guys like that, and Drew Mestmaker has qualities of those guys, of an NFL quarterback. And it veered out of like coach speak, like just had a great game, to like, he really believes Drew Mestmaker could be something for North Texas. Do him and Poffenbarger have the same sort of skill set, or are they completely different players?
I don't think they have the exact same skill set, but I do think that there's some commonalities there. I mean, they're both pretty solid athletes. I'd imagine we see more QB run game from North Texas. Maybe not to the extent of Chandler Rogers, but definitely more than Chandler Morris. And so it's going to be kind of a middle ground there. We saw what that offense looked like with the dual threat quarterback. I don't know. I was only out there for like one practice, so I don't want to draw too many conclusions. But
yeah,
both pretty solid throwers of the football. They're both roughly, similar sizes, big enough. And I think the Eric Morris's offense like simultaneously puts a lot on the quarterback's plate, but also makes it pretty easy for them. Like once they kind of figure out where to go with the ball and kind of how to read the reads in the way that he does. And so I just assume one of the two is going to be good. Going to be good, or at least productive. Quarterback. He's had to change quarterbacks, each of the years he's been there, which has to be a frustrating process. But I do think that gives you a little bit of practice on how to make this adjustment. So I don't think quarterback's going to be their biggest concern. I think they have two guys that they really feel good about. And then they have a true freshman there that they really like. I mean, Chris Jimerson is a name that was mentioned a couple times while I was there today. Can really throw the football, won a state championship, obviously. But I don't think he's going to be in the mix for this year unless some injuries happen.
So what is going to be their problem potentially on the offense? I mean, this is the second year in a row Eric Morris has had to replace his quarterback, his leading wide receiver, his leading rusher. Who's stepping up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they like their outside wide receivers. Like Landon Sides is going to play a little bit more outside. I think that suits him pretty well. They brought in Simeon Evans State, who's a big potential upside guy who I know that Sam Houston, before they left to Temple, was really high on going into 2025. Miles Coleman, who made a state championship at Vandergrift, slot receiver, not the biggest dude in the world, but he had some big games last year. He's going to be productive. Again, it's just one of those offenses that is going to produce at least through the air. I think the question mark for North Texas and something that they want is more balance and to be able to run the football. Last year was a little bit out of their control because they had so many injuries. I think they had like 4 or 5 running backs like get lost for the season at one point last year. North Texas played 10 different starting lineups on the offensive side of the football. So a lot of injuries over there. I think they're assuming that the injury bug is going to like cancel each other out. Like it's going to get back to normal. They're going to be healthier at running the football. And I think that they're going to need to. I think that they're going to need more balance this year with the quarterback. I don't think that they're going to have as good a quarterback play probably. And so they're going to need to be able to run the football a little bit more. And I think that will also help the defense. If you can slow it down a little bit more, be more methodical, lean on your offensive line. It doesn't always have to be go, 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 throw the ball, score a bunch of points. I think they want to be more of a physical, downhill, run the football at times football team.
Do you know who the running backs are right now?
I mean, they're going to do it by committee. Mackenzie McGill was somebody that was talked about. Jane Becks is a transfer that they like. Shaddy Clayton Johnson is probably the leader in the clubhouse to be the starter. I think it's going to be by committee, and that's usually how running back coach Patrick Cobbs likes to do it. Even when Luttrell was there and they were putting up a bunch of yards, for the most part, they were a group that liked to rotate in and out. I think they have some running backs that can do different things, and Morris likes to personnel match in that way. And so I think it'll be a 3-4-headed monster back there. Maybe somebody emerges as the go-to bell cow. I think it's more likely in this offense that it's by committee.
So I remember, let's switch over to the defensive side. I remember when you went to the North Texas visit last year and Eric Morris basically told you Mike, I'm from the Mike Leach tree. I got some stubbornness in me. And he was basically sitting in every defensive meeting over spring football. Is he doing that again this year?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think he's back. I think he's back to mostly being the offensive guy. I think Morris wants to be more Mike Lee, right? Where it's I'm going to give a lot of autonomy over to these defensive side of the ball. When I was an offensive coordinator, I liked them to leave me alone because they hired me to run the offense, right? If I'm hiring you to run the defense, go run the defense. I'm calling plays over here, figure it out. I don't think that was possible going into year 2. They were trying to get some stuff corrected. It obviously didn't get all the way corrected, or they wouldn't have made a defensive coordinator change. But the guy that they brought in has a history of turning around a defense in 1 year. Like he's done is his third school in 3 years. He brings in a lot of familiar faces that are going to help not only them hit the ground running, but like also convey messages to the rest of the roster, right? Like Skylar Cassidy doesn't have to be the only one teaching the defense to the defense. Like Trey Fields can do that. David Fisher can do that. Richard Allen Jr. can do that up front. And so I think that gives them a little bit of advantage. It's not just a complete start from scratch. But I don't imagine the defense being as bad this year. Like they're going to be more creative. They're going to look different. They're going to personnel match the offense, right? And not only be in just one defense that looks the same all the time. Like there's going to be an exotic nature to it that I think is going to really help the North Texas football team.
This is probably an unfair question because I think the entire defense is somewhat of a question mark with so many new faces and the new coordinator. But what is that biggest question mark that you think the staff has about their defense right now?
It's probably linebacker, honestly. Right. And maybe I think some of that's just like depth of linebacker. Like Trey Fields was a starting middle linebacker at Sam Houston. So obviously Cassidy in that group feels really good about what he brings. But then it's like, who's next to him? Is it Chavez Brown, Blake Fan? Ethan Weslowski has been there for a little while. So like, who's going to be that other middle linebacker? And you're going to lose a guy or two, right? It's like a violent position, just like running back. You're going to have some injuries. So like, where's the depth there? Do they try to get into the portal and find somebody else? So I'd imagine it's linebacker. You're always going to have question marks for depth, the defensive tackle at the G5. I mean, most P4s have a question mark of who their interior run defenders are going to be after they're starting two. And so they may be pretty young at that spot. So maybe the spine, right? Like defensive tackle, middle linebacker, not so much the starters, but like what's behind those guys, because the depth's going to be tested. 3 of their 12 games are against option teams, right? They play Army, Navy, Rice.
Brutal.
And so like they're going to need defensive tackles. They're going to need linebackers. They're going to need some depth. And that's something that they haven't been good at. Like North Texas has been really bad against the run. So I guess just run until proven otherwise. I think it's reasonable to doubt the Mean Green's ability to stop the run consistently.
Were there any returning North Texas players that Cassidy or the coaching defensive staff were like, oh, we love this guy, like he's going to be starting, he's been really good? Or is this going to be like a wholesale, like this is all the spots are up for grabs?
And one linebacker I forgot to mention is Shane Witter. That's probably a name I need to get out there. He's going to be a starter. He's a good football player. I think to answer that question, it's probably Brian Nelson at cornerback. They really, really like him. Like he was mentioned multiple times to be at my stop earlier today, not only by the coaching staff, but by a couple players. Like I talked to Landon Sides, the wide receiver, and asked him like, who are the guys that are hardest to go against right now in one-on-ones? And the first name out of his mouth was Brian Nelson. So I think he's going to be in a competition with Armstrong or Armstead and Fisher, who were both starters at Sam Houston. And that's probably where they feel the best. Like I think cornerback is probably their strongest position on paper. Like they feel really good about those 3 dudes. And Brian Nelson's a big part of that. Braylon Charles is another guy at defensive end. Like they really like him. June Fafita, the defensive tackle, that they're a big fan of him. So I think there's three or four returning guys, starters mixed in with some transfer portal dudes.
Do you have any picks for stock to rise the most? I know you've talked about so many guys here that stock could rise, but like anyone they were super high on, and maybe either where they were at Sam Houston or at North Texas, and could turn in an all conference type season.
I think on the defensive side of the ball, like a name to watch emerge, maybe Jaden Williams, just defensive tackle. As I mentioned, they just don't have a ton behind, Richard Outland and June there on the defensive line. And so, he may need to be a player that plays 20, 30 snaps a game, and that'll give him a chance to break out. Maybe somebody like a Kavion Huddleston is a name off the edge that I heard at defensive end. And remember, that's a great name. Remember, this is a team transitioning from an odd man front and 3-man defensive line to mostly a 4-man defensive line. Like Cassidy will mix and match. He mentioned today against Hawaii last year, they didn't play a 4-man defensive line once, right? So he doesn't want to be labeled as a 4-man fronter. But I think most of the snaps are going to be from a 4-man front, and that's required North Texas to bring in a completely different type of edge. they needed a different type. We just talked about Baylor, who uses defensive tackles, like almost like 3 technique defensive tackles as defensive ends, like a Cooper Lands will play more defensive end this year. Whereas North Texas is now transitioned to the traditional, like we need some pass rush ends. Like that's where we're going to get our pressure from. And so they've had to bring in a bunch of new bodies out there. But that's the flip side. The G5 teams like North Texas get killed by the portal. But it also allows them to go and make this kind of roster flip, scheme flip into a completely different staff. In the old days, you would have just inherited what you had and you had to work for a couple of years to figure it out. Well, Cassidy gets to bring in a couple of defensive ends that fit his scheme, a couple of defensive tackles that fit his scheme, and then like 5 dudes that he just coached as starters at Sam Houston. I don't think it's unfair to expect a pretty drastic improvement from that side of the ball right away.
Yeah, on that transfer portal note, are there any positions where they said after spring ball we might need to go get 1 or 2 guys in this position group, or are they good with what they have right now pending spring portal? What could happen to their roster?
Yeah, I mean, I do think linebacker could be a spot where they kind of dip into the portal for some depth, maybe defensive tackle if they can find one. The bigger they are, the harder they are to find in the portal, right? So it's like, everybody's looking for a transfer defensive tackle or an offensive guard. So like, of course they would take more depth on either side of the ball in the trenches. But I think linebacker is a spot, wide receiver, if there's one out there that they think could be productive, I'd imagine they wouldn't turn down another playmaker. They're not the biggest wide receiver core in the world. They look like a bunch of Eric Morrises, right? Like you can tell that he was a smaller wide receiver that doesn't mind having smaller wide receivers. But I'd imagine
like, there's something I like about you.
right. It's like looking at a mirror. I would imagine that they could play on the outside, that could go and win a one-on-one matchup up in the air, that they wouldn't turn that down either.
Well, that's a pretty exhaustive North Texas preview right there. Anything we didn't cover in this you wanted to go over?
I don't think so. I do. They're not shying away from the fact that like this sets up for a real run for them. It's year 3. They feel like they've recruited really well out of the high school ranks. And now there's, a bunch of young guys ready to really take a next step. I think almost like half of their starters in the bowl game last year were first or second year players. And so they think that this is a year combined with their schedule. They think that there's no reason that they can't go, compete for a conference championship. And that would be a pretty big step forward for a team that scratched its way into a bowl game last year.
It's going to be a pivotal year for North Texas. And by the time this is out, Craven, when are you dropping the insider notes at North Texas? Do you know will it be out when this is playing tomorrow?
It'll be out either Wednesday or Thursday. So most likely while you're listening to this.
So most likely while you're listening, if not, it's Thursday morning. Check it out, TexasFootball.com. Insider notes from North Texas practice. You can read about them and Baylor. And I know a place where you can get some merch from North Texas or Baylor. Home Field Apparel. Guys, go to homefieldapparel.com. Use promo code DCTF for 10% off your purchase on Baylor, North Texas gear. You can take any college gear. I know Texas women's basketball just made the Final Four last night. I was watching that game. I'd love to get some new Texas merch. I don't know if they have any Final Four merch, but I can use any burnt orange I can get. So guys, go to homefieldapparel.com, promo code DCTF for 10% off. That's promo code DCTF at Homefield Apparel for 10% off your purchase.
Speaking of merch real quick, one last thing from my North Texas visit, just to get this on record. I was a little cold this morning. I don't know how cold it was in DFW, but I mean, it didn't count. So it was a little cold up there. The wind gets going, a little bit more wide open. I had to get a windbreaker, like a wind jacket, a little pullover from the fine folks at North Texas. So I was walking around outside today in public with a North Texas jacket on.
Oh my God. Hopefully someone was in the trees taking a picture of that one.
Yeah. Hopefully not, but we'll see if that surfaces.
All right. So that'll do it for our magazine stops for right now. Let's talk about a piece you had come out last week, Craven, ranking the Texas programs through the half decade. That's 2020 through 2024. I love these sort of pieces, like a mid-decade check-in on which teams are doing the best, which teams are falling short in this decade. I saw, this is graph from your story, that UTSA, Texas, and SMU are the only teams to win over 40 games and at least one conference championship. But I think it's been a pretty solid decade for the state of Texas. Am I wrong in saying that? I feel like most of these teams are competitive.
Yeah, I'm trying to look here. There's 8 teams with above 500 records. All the P4 teams are above 500 records over that span. We didn't include Sam Houston in this because they've only been going at it for 2 years at the FBS level. But I think a really good year for the state, and it's all trending forward for most of those teams. Like even the teams at the top, like an SMU, Texas Tech. They're all trending forward. I think TCU, Baylor feel pretty good about what's happening this year. Even teams like Willie Fritz and UTEP with Scotty Walden going into year 2, they think that's going forward. So I think it was 9 or 10 of our team. I think 10 teams last year from the state made bowl games out of the 13. I would imagine 9 or 10 make bowl games again this year. For a state that's as football crazy and football loved as we are and the amount of talent here, like that's how it should be. And there was a couple of down years kind of before and after the pandemic. But I think it's trending upward for most of the schools in the state.
Do we want to read off 1 through 12 of how they rank, or do we want to just go like, hey, who did better than expected? Who did worse than expected?
Let's go. Well, I'll read off the top 5 just so we have like an idea of who's the top here. Them just by overall wins since the decade. And the thing that kind of caught me, I didn't realize it was halfway through the decade. It always gets me because it's like 24. You think of 25 being halfway through the decade, but they've played 5 seasons, so it was like let me go through magazine research into like real content because you're looking it up. You might as well turn it into clicks. UTSA was 1 with 46 wins, Texas 2 with 45, 3 with 44. Then a pretty big dip. TCU at 4th with 38, and then 5 Texas A&M at 37, Texas Tech at 6 with 34. So kind of what you would expect maybe, I think, at the top, but UTSA kind of like taking the cake in the overall wins, conference championships with 2, bowl appearances. They've been in a bowl every single season. That none of the other schools have done that. So the Roadrunners, especially after those 2 conference championship seasons of, I guess that was 21 and 22, still atop the leaderboard, even though Texas is catching up pretty quickly.
Yeah, Texas pulled the old Vince Young, like chill in the first half, go off in the second half. I think 25 of those wins came in the last 2 years, you wrote. I don't want to say that UTSA being at the top surprised me, but I think it surprised me that Jeff Traylor's been there for 5 years now. Like it feels like it's been a lot longer than I even registered in my head of how long he's been there.
Yeah, him and Aranda got there at the exact same time. And so, looking at their careers matched up together, it's been pretty interesting. But yeah, it's been a pretty solid ride for UTSA since he's got there. Obviously, the stat that always stands out to me is they're 29-3 at home since he's been the head coach there. And 2 of those losses are to Army, and the other one was to Houston in double overtime with Clayton Toon. I think maybe it was triple overtime. So like their conference record is 31-8 over that time, and they just win their home games. They just kind of take care of business, and that's kind of been the staple of Jeff Traylor's tenure so far.
Who's the team in this top 5 that you think should be higher? And I think I have one that I'm thinking of right here.
I mean, it should be A&M. Like Texas A&M shouldn't be the 5th best program in the state of Texas. Like they should be in the argument for first. I mean, they paid a coach $80 million. Like, you have underachieved when you have the type of war chest that the Aggies have, and you haven't even played for a conference championship game, much less won one or played in a major bowl, a New Year's Six bowl, any of that kind of stuff. So with the recruiting classes that they had and how well they were recruiting early on in the decade, Jimbo Fisher, that 9-win 2020 season where it looked like they had really turned the corner, and maybe they make the college football playoff in a normal year that year. You thought it was going to really turn for the Aggies, and it just never did.
Yeah, and to be fair, like Texas was like that all the 2010s too. So like those 2 rivals have flip-flopped. This is mean, but I was just thinking as you were talking, like I know that A&M gave Jimbo Fisher like a fake national championship trophy. Like what if they gave him like a fake like 5th in Texas trophy, right? Like 5th best team.
I put out that power poll last week, and I had A&M 6th, and I got bashed online by some people. even Billy Lucci from Texas called me out, and I had to be like, Billy, they were 6th last year. Like they don't like that's where A&M finishes. They go into the season as the second best team in the state, and they finish the season as the 5th or 6th best team in the state. And with the talent that they have, that shouldn't be the case. I think it'll stop being the case with Mike Elko. I don't know if it'll be this year that course corrects. But they're absolutely the most disappointing team in the state just because of the advantages and the money that they have and constantly falling short of expectations.
Yeah, I think it puts even more pressure too when Texas is ascending like this. You even write here that they're a safe bet to end the decade with the most wins. It's also similar to how SMU and TCU are both 3 and 4. They're kind of in that upper echelon rivals right there. You are what your record is, but also what your rival's record is. That goes into the Vibes rankings too. So that's interesting to see. And you want to move on to, let's go to the bottom half here, or let's go mid-pack. Let's go 6 through 9. All right.
Yeah, I think Houston being 31 and 28, they're kind of buoyed by, a couple seasons there at the G5. North Texas is hanging out there at 9th. I guess what really stood out to me from the list is how top heavy the P4 versus the G5 is. And we're seeing that more and more because of the transfer portal, but it was already trending that way. It seems like earlier in the decade anyway, but most of the top teams are the P4 teams outside of UTSA, and most of the bottom teams are G5 teams. And I don't think that's a coincidence. It's probably a testament to how good Jeff Traylor's tenure has been at UTSA, but it just shows the growing gap. And it's also kind of a product of non-conference schedules. When you're Tech and Tech's a bunch of games you can win, and when you're UTEP and Rice, you schedule a bunch of games that get you paid. And so inherently, you're not going to have the ceiling to go win 10 or 11 games because you're body bagged by 2 or 3 of them. And so I do think it's that as well.
So 6 is Texas Tech, T7 Baylor, T7 Houston, 9 North Texas. I've got a question for you. Would you rather, this is a philosophical question, would you rather be Texas Tech, who's 34 and 28 but has no conference championships, or would you rather be Baylor, who is somehow 31 and 30 despite the most yo-yo seasons ever, with 1 Big 12 championship and then a bottoming out of 3 and 9? Would you rather be Steady Eddie or have that one awesome year but then a couple horrid years?
Yeah, this is probably a personality question, and what you value in life and stuff. I've thought a lot about this because I find this pretty interesting. I think I'd rather be Texas Tech because the highs just don't do a ton for me. It's just not I get the trophy or anything. I kind of judge my sports fandom of how enjoyable the experience was throughout the year. Right. Mm-hmm. So I'll take a really good team over a great team if I don't have to sacrifice just really crappy years. And I think if you've been a Tech fan for the last few years, you haven't suffered through a 3 and 9. You haven't suffered through the Matt Wells years, and you did fire a coach. But I do feel the trajectory has been consistently up, and the last 3 or 4 years have been optimistic and happy and, an exciting time in Lubbock, where there's been times in Baylor where it was bleak. And I'll just point to attendance. Tech has stayed full and excited. And there was times where Baylor was it seems revolting against the staff and not showing up to football games. And that tells me that there's just been a steadier level of excitement in Lubbock. And I would take that as a fan over the trophy or whatever, winning 1 championship.
It's definitely more frustrating when your team has won it all, the Big 12, and then bottoms out like that, because it's what all changes, if it's the same staff and stuff, why is it not working anymore? And definitely more frustrating, definitely more of an emotional whiplash. But I don't know, the championship t-shirts are pretty sweet, to rock those around.
Yeah.
So
I think most people would pick the championship. I think most people would pick Baylor. I just think that the way I take in sports, I would rather my team just be consistently really good than up and down, up and down.
But I also remember being a Cowboys fan back in the day, and when they finished 8-8 3 years in a row and lost the last NFC East game to miss the playoffs, and those were the most agonizing years as a Cowboys fan. So you could really see both sides. I don't know. I think for the sake of argument, I'll go. I like the Big 12 championship T-shirt. I like that 1 year winning the trophy. The game-saving tackle against Oklahoma State was sweet. But I definitely see your argument too of why that would be better to just be consistently in contention.
It's just fleeting, right? Like the championships are just like a fleeting feeling that you don't get to hold on to, where like the optimism of the next year and like always kind of being in it a little bit help. Like a Tech fan hasn't really, over the last 3 years at least, a Tech fan hasn't really like checked out of the season.
True.
Like you're in it because it's still like going on. Whereas like there's been 2 years, 3 of the last 4, like where like Baylor fans have like checked out of seasons because they could. And I'll just take the like being engaged throughout the year, kind of going through that process over the one up. But like championships are nice. I'm not trying to poo-poo on championships for sure.
Yeah. Flags fly forever. Here's a stat that makes zero sense to me. How does North Texas have a conference championship game appearance and a bowl appearance in 4 of the last 5 seasons, and they're 28-34 without a winning season since 2018?
Championship game, adds an extra game to your season if you lose to bowl games. And then they, one was like the pandemic year. I think they made it to bowl games, kind of like Rice, where they made it to a couple bowl games without a winning record type of deal. And so they made the postseason, but posted a losing record at the end of it. I mean, they made a conference championship game a couple years ago and were like 7-6 on the year or something like that. Right. So something like that. It's maybe 7-7.
7-7.
I'm not a very good math guy. But yeah, I mean, I just think they've had a couple of years where they've lost a lot of non-con. They kind of been average during conference play. They've gotten into bowl games just because of where they are and kind of, their APR or however that QPR, however that works. But yeah, I haven't had the 9-3, 10-2 seasons to kind of balance it out and give them a bunch of cushion. It's all been kind of in that 5-7 to 7-5 kind of range.
And rounding it out at the bottom here is 10 Texas State, tied 11th Rice, tied 11th UTEP. I'd argue that, like you said before, even those teams at the bottom have a lot to talk themselves into positive-wise.
Yeah, especially Texas State. 16 wins over the last 2 years, 2 bowl wins over both of those years. Like definitely moving moving in the right direction. And it's where Texas State should be. Like with how big they are, the amount of students they have, the location that they're in, like the academic standards, like having a president that cares, an athletic director that's competent, a head coach that's good. Like that's all lined up for them. And they're starting to kind of like fulfill what their potential should be, and that Texas State should be in that 7, 8, 9 range, not in the bottom tiers. It's Rice and UTEP that I find to be like uniquely tough jobs. Like I just think historically it's okay to admit that those are probably the 2 toughest jobs in the state, and it's been hard to figure out the recipes. They've only had 1 or 2 winning seasons each since 2014. Rice hasn't had a winning season since 2014. And so it's just been really hard to consistently figure out a way to do it at those schools. But you got a year 2 coach and Scotty coach and Scott Abel. Like I think momentum is high, excitement is high, and that's all you can ask for at those places. Rice is going to be the fun one to watch over these next. Not that UTEP won't be, but just Rice going in such a unique path, especially in this state with the kind of pistol option. Fascinated to see how that works out.
Yeah, is that one of those magazine stops you're like one of the most excited for? I mean, I know you already talked to Scott Abel, but like I'd be excited to see what his first spring ball is looking like.
I'm going to go to the spring game. Not that like games are games anymore, but I just want like some kind of proper context to what this offense looks like. Like I don't really need to see Tech run offense. Like I've seen Mac Leftwich coach, all that kind of stuff. But like I don't know what it looks like, especially with that personnel, like who's running together. How does it look? Yeah, I'm really excited to kind of just see with my own eyes kind of what that looks like, even if it's in a very modified version of itself.
That's all the thoughts I had about this program ranking. Thought it was a really cool piece, going through the magazine, you're flipping that bad boy open a lot in this time of year. It's, make some content out of it. That's pretty cool. Any thoughts from you on this piece?
No, I one of the reasons I also made it was to have a reference to look back on, just to see how the second half of the decade goes, because I think it's unfair to take 1 year snapshots of these colleges. Like there's just so much ebb and flow. It's college football. But when you can go kind of 5 years at a time, 10 years can tell a lie as well. I think 4 or 5 years, just because that's the life cycle of a college athlete, or at least it's supposed to be, I think kind of gives you an idea of like the trajectory of where a team's going, where a team's not going, and kind of what the recent history's been.
Well, that'll do it for the Republic of Football, guys. Keep it locked in on TexasWell.com to see Craven's insider scoops that'll be going up. It's one of the most busy times of the year here. Dave Campbell's one of the most fun times of the year too. Seeing getting back into the swing of things, flipping the page over to 2025. Craven, enjoy your sleep while you're getting it on this magazine work tour / vacation. I appreciate you stopping in. And for senior writer Mike Craven, I am Carter Yates signing off for the Republic of Football podcast, and podcast over.